Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Tick Tock, Doom, Chicago Nightmare. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1, City of Dreams. The wind clawed at my hair, a biting November chill replacing the usual autumn breeze. I scurried across the Michigan Avenue Bridge, dodging tourists, snapping photos with reckless abandon. Chicago's skyline, a jagged silhouette ablaze in the dying sun, always sent a jolt of excitement through me. It was a constant reminder of the city's relentless ambition, a feeling that mirrored my own. As a junior at Northwestern, I was a human dynamo fueled by a potent cocktail of coffee and ambition. My days were a whirlwind of lectures, library sessions that stretched into the night, and a part-time job at the university archives. Sleep was a luxury, sacrificed at the altar of academic excellence. Professors marveled at my relentless hunger for knowledge. Classmates envied my laser-sharp focus. Tonight, however, the usual fervor felt strained. Professor Thompson's upcoming cognitive psychology exam loomed large, a dark cloud threatening to drown my confidence. The sheer volume of material was overwhelming, a dense jungle of theories and experiments that threatened to devour me whole. Reaching my apartment building, a worn red brick haven tucked amidst the steel giants, I dug for my keys with fumbling fingers. The familiar scent of stale coffee and well-worn textbooks greeted me as I slammed the door shut. Ignoring the siren song of my bed, I practically flung myself onto the desk, textbooks exploding in a chaotic sprawl. Hours blurred into one another, punctuated only by the rhythmic scratching of my pen and the distant hum of the city below. Fatigue gnawed at the edges of my concentration, turning the words on the page into an indecipherable mess. Just as despair threatened to consume me, a knock on the door shattered the silence. It was Emily, my best friend and roommate, a kaleidoscope of colors and carefree spirit who served as a constant counterpoint to my relentless focus. "Earth to Sarah," she called through the door, her voice muffled. "Haven't seen your face since breakfast. Come join the living. Pizza's on its way." The thought of greasy goodness and a break from the mental marathon was all the incentive I needed. I flung open the door, a tired smile stretching across my face. As Emily took in the battlefield of textbooks scattered across the desk, her brow furrowed with concern. "Brutal exam coming up?" I slumped onto the couch, the tension seeping out of my shoulders with an audible sigh. Brutal doesn't even begin to describe it. Professor Thompson's lectures are drier than the Sahara. How anyone's supposed to remember all that stuff is beyond me. Emily plopped down beside me, a playful jab aimed in my direction. "Always aiming for perfection, Miss Overachiever. Maybe there's another way besides sleep deprivation." I let out a dry chuckle. "I wish. But cutting corners isn't exactly my style." Little did I know, fate was about to present me with a shortcut that promised to revolutionize my studies, a shortcut with a terrifying cost that would forever alter my reality. Chapter 2, The Lucrative Offer. The pizza was lukewarm and greasy, a far cry from the gourmet concoctions Emily usually favored. Yet each bite felt like a tiny victory, a stolen moment of normalcy before the looming exam. Between mouthfuls, I recounted the intricacies of memory consolidation and synaptic pathways, my voice tinged with exhaustion. Emily listened patiently, her expressive brown eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight on our makeshift dining table. "Sounds like torture," she finally commiserated, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe you should consider alternative study methods. Meditation? Chewing gum?" I scoffed, wiping a greasy smudge off my chin. Thanks. But I think I'll stick to the proven methods even if they are mind-numbingly dull. Just as I reached for another slice, a flyer snagged on my sleeve, fluttering to the floor. It was a crumpled piece of paper, the edges slightly singed, as if someone had tried to discard it hastily. Emily picked it up, her brow furrowing in curiosity. "Neurological Research Facility," she read aloud, tracing the bold lettering with her finger. "Enhance your cognitive function and memory. Participate in a groundbreaking clinical trial. Earn up to $5,000. A jolt of electricity shot through me. $5,000. That was more than 3 months of rent, enough to finally pay off that nagging student loan. The exam suddenly seemed a small price to pay for such a windfall. "Sounds fishy," Emily commented, her voice laced with suspicion. "Clinical trials usually offer peanuts, not a fortune." My skepticism warred with the tempting sum. "Maybe it's legit," I ventured, snatching the flyer from her hand. "They must have some strict criteria, like perfect health or something." Emily snatched the flyer back, her gaze unwavering. "Sarah, you know you barely sleep and chug coffee like it's water. Perfect health wouldn't describe you even on your best day." A pang of guilt stabbed at me. Emily was right, but the financial incentive was too powerful to ignore. "I could at least check it out," I mumbled, already formulating a plan in my head. Maybe a quick screening wouldn't hurt. The decision would come back to haunt me, the first step on a path toward a terrifying nightmare, a distortion of reality where time itself became my prison. Chapter 3: Doubts and Decision. The following week was a blur of activity. Armed with the crumpled flyer and a heart full of both excitement and apprehension, I contacted the research facility. A smooth, talking voice on the other end of the phone assured me that the compensation was real and the screening process was painless. They scheduled me for an appointment the following day. Emily, ever the voice of reason, expressed her disapproval throughout the ordeal. "Don't you find it strange they're offering such a high amount?" she asked, her face etched with worry. "And why the secrecy? No information about the drug itself?" My resolve wavered under her scrutiny. "Maybe it's a new kind of study," I offered weakly. "They might be willing to pay a premium for pioneering participants." Secretly, I harbored a different fear. What if Emily was right? What if the flyer was a scam, a lure to exploit desperate students like myself? Despite my anxieties, the promise of financial freedom proved too compelling. The following afternoon, I found myself standing outside the imposing glass and steel complex housing the research facility, a sense of foreboding settling in my stomach. The sterile, white-walled lobby did nothing to ease my unease. A receptionist, with an unsettlingly blank smile, directed me towards a waiting room filled with nervous-looking individuals. Leafing through outdated magazines, I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling of being watched. One by one, candidates were called in for their screenings. Time stretched on, each tick of the clock echoing in the sterile silence like a hammer blow. Finally, my name was called. As I walked into the doctor's office, a sense of dread washed over me. This was the point of no return. The decision I was about to make could change my life, for better or worse. Chapter 4: Crossing the Line. The doctor, a man in a crisp white lab coat with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me, greeted me with a practiced smile. He led me through a series of tests, blood draws, cognitive assessments, a battery of questions about my medical history. Throughout the process, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The facility exuded an air of secrecy, the white walls and hushed tones doing little to dispel the mounting tension. Finally, the doctor reached for a small vial filled with a clear liquid. "This is the experimental drug we're testing," he explained, his voice devoid of emotion. It's designed to enhance cognitive function and memory consolidation. The side effects, if any, are expected to be minimal. Minimal, the word echoed in my head, a hollow promise. But the prospect of the hefty reward drowned out any lingering doubts. Taking a deep breath, I nodded my agreement. The doctor injected the drug into my arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a wave of warmth washed over me, spreading from the injection site throughout my body. A sense of heightened focus and almost unnatural clarity flooded my mind. Images became sharper, sounds crisper. The doctor observed me with a predatory glint in his eyes. "How do you feel, Miss Jones?" "Amazing," I breathed, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I feel alert, focused, like I can tackle anything." The doctor's smile widened. "Excellent. Then you'll be the perfect candidate for the trial. Just remember, report any unusual side effects immediately." Leaving the research facility, the city seemed brighter, the sounds sharper. I felt like I could run a marathon, memorize a textbook in minutes. The nagging fatigue that had plagued me for weeks was gone, replaced by an invigorating surge of energy. That night, fueled by the drug's effects, I devoured my textbooks. Concepts that were once murky became crystal clear, information seeming to stick effortlessly in my mind. A thrill of accomplishment coursed through me. This drug was a miracle. Exhaustion eventually overcame me, and I drifted off to sleep with a smile. Little did I know, the drug's incredible benefits came with a terrifying cost. A cost that would turn my world into a slow-motion nightmare. Chapter 5, Initial Effects. The alarm clock blared, its insistent shrillness a stark contrast to the unnatural quiet that had shrouded my apartment throughout the night. Groaning, I rolled over, expecting the usual grogginess that accompanied early mornings. But something felt different. Utterly different. My body felt oddly heavy, as if glued to the mattress. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I couldn't move. My eyelids struggled to open, each blink a Herculean effort. A thin sheen of sweat broke out on my forehead, the familiar morning routine replaced by a suffocating sense of paralysis. Finally, with a Herculean effort, I managed to pry one eye open. The room was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, the view outside my window unchanged. Yet everything felt strangely still. Too still. The frantic thumping of my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the eerie silence. Desperate to call for help, I tried to reach for my phone on the nightstand, but my arm moved with the sluggishness of a glacier. It felt like wading through molasses, every micro-movement an agonizing struggle. A raw scream tore from my throat, a strangled sound that died unheard in the cotton wool atmosphere of the room. My voice, once vibrant and energetic, emerged as a pathetic croak. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the already distorted scene before me. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision caught my eye. Emily stood by the doorway, a look of horror etched on her face. But even she moved in slow motion, her worried expression morphing into a grotesque caricature as she reached out a hand to help. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Her voice, usually laced with warmth, sounded distant and distorted, like someone speaking through a thick fog. The terror intensified. This wasn't normal. This couldn't be real. Was this a dream? A cruel, elaborate prank by Emily? But the cold sweat clinging to my skin, the frantic pounding of my heart, these sensations were undeniable. With the last vestiges of my strength, I managed a single word, a pathetic croak that escaped my lips in a raspy whisper. Help. Time seemed to stretch on forever, each second an eternity. Finally, Emily's hand, moving at a glacial pace, reached my outstretched arm. The touch, surprisingly cool, sent a jolt through my paralyzed body. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the room lurched back into action. Normal speed, normal sound. Relief washed over me in a tidal wave. "What happened?" Emily exclaimed, fear lacing her voice. "You were just stuck. I couldn't get you to wake up." A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I closed my eyes, my mind a jumble of confusion and fear. Was this a side effect of the drug? A glitch in reality? The answer remained an unsettling mystery. But one thing was certain, something had changed. The miraculous drug promised by the research facility had a terrifying side effect, and I was just beginning to understand its horrifying cost. Chapter 6: The Slow Creep. The events of that morning cast a long shadow over my day. Every movement felt heavy, laden with an invisible weight. A simple act, like brushing my teeth, became an exercise in frustration, each stroke of the brush an agonizingly slow process. Emily, oblivious to my internal struggle, kept shooting me concerned glances. "Maybe you should skip class," she suggested, her voice laced with worry. "You look pale." The thought of missing a lecture was unbearable, especially now when the drug seemed to have enhanced my cognitive abilities. Information soaked into my brain like a sponge, complex theories clicking into place with effortless ease. Yet, the price for this newfound clarity was a terrifying physical limitation. Determined to push through, I ventured out into the bustling city. The normally chaotic street scene now appeared like a silent movie, a jerky display of slow-motion movements. Cars crawled along the road, their horns emitting drawn-out wails. Pedestrians shuffled along, their faces contorted in masks of perpetual surprise as they reacted to the slowed-down world. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just a minor side effect. This was a complete distortion of reality. Panic gnawed at the edges of my composure. Was I trapped in this slow-motion nightmare forever? Reaching the library, a haven of quiet contemplation under normal circumstances, only amplified the strange silence. I sank into a chair, the simple act taking an eternity. Desperate to distract myself, I pulled out a textbook, the words blurring before my eyes. Reading, once a source of comfort, now felt like an impossible feat. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Glancing at the clock on the wall, I felt a fresh surge of terror. The second hand, normally a blur of constant movement, inched forward with excruciating slowness. A single tick seemed to take an eternity. This wasn't just slowed down time. It was a molasses-thick crawl, stretching each second into an agonizing ordeal. Tears welled up in my eyes, the feeling of helplessness threatening to engulf me. As the day wore on, the isolation grew unbearable. The once familiar library now felt like a tomb, its occupants trapped in their own personal slow-motion worlds. A suffocating loneliness settled over me, a desperate yearning for human connection in this warped reality. Just then, a figure emerged from the stacks, moving at a slightly faster pace than the others. It was Emily, her face etched with concern, but even her movements were sluggish, a distorted echo of her usual, energetic self. Relief flooded through me, a tiny spark of hope in the terrifying darkness. "Sarah, there you are," she exclaimed, her voice distorted but still recognizable. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The urge to reach out, to share my terrifying experience, was overwhelming. But even the simplest gesture, a nod, a smile, felt like an insurmountable challenge. Struggling for control, I managed to croak out a single word, barely audible above the oppressive silence. "Help." Chapter 7. A Desperate Plea. Emily's worried gaze held mine captive. The distorted world around us seemed to fade away, replaced by the desperate urgency in her eyes. I strained with every fiber of my being, willing myself to move, to speak, to communicate the horror that gripped me. Finally, a flicker of movement in my hand. It was barely perceptible, a tremor so slight it could have been a figment of my imagination. But to me, it was a monumental feat, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. Focusing every ounce of energy, I managed a single jerky nod in Emily's direction. It was enough. Her face contorted in a mix of relief and terror. She understood. "What's happening to you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the distorted silence. Question echoed in my mind, a desperate plea for an answer I didn't possess. How could I explain the horrific time dilation, the suffocating slowness that had become my reality? The limitations of my voice, a raspy croak at best, made any explanation futile. Suddenly, a terrifying realization dawned on me. Was I trapped here alone? Was Emily experiencing the same distorted timeline? Or was I the only one imprisoned in this slow-motion nightmare? A wave of despair threatened to consume me. If I couldn't communicate, if I couldn't break free from this warped reality, then what hope did I have? Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the already distorted scene before me. In a desperate attempt, I pointed a shaky finger at the clock on the wall. The second hand, a monument to agonizingly slow progress, seemed to mock my predicament. Emily followed my gaze, her expression hardening with resolve. "I get it," she said, her voice a low growl. "This is the drug's doing, isn't it?" I managed another tremor of a nod, a silent confirmation of her suspicions. A glint of determination flickered in her eyes, a spark of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. "Don't worry, Sarah," she said, her voice surprisingly strong in the distorted silence. "We'll figure this out together." Her words were a lifeline, a ray of hope in the seemingly endless despair. But the question remained how. In this slow-motion world, even the simplest action felt like an insurmountable challenge. I needed to find a way to communicate, to explain the horrors I was experiencing. And more importantly, I needed to find a way out of this prison of distorted time before it was too late. Chapter 8. Panic Rising. The air hung heavy with the weight of unspoken terror. Emily knelt beside me, her eyes searching mine for answers. But communication in this molasses-thick world proved agonizingly difficult. My voice remained a raspy croak, each word a Herculean effort to produce. Frustration welled up within me, threatening to spill over into a full-blown panic attack. I desperately wanted to explain the distorted timeline, the excruciating slowness that had become my reality. Pointing again at the clock, I tried to convey the terrifying disparity between my perception of time and the normal world. Emily's gaze followed my gesture, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. "So, time is moving slower for you?" she asked, her voice a distorted whisper. I managed a single, weak nod, a silent confirmation of her guess. Relief flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a renewed determination. "Okay," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We need a way to get help." But how? The question hung heavy in the air. The library patrons, trapped in their own slow-motion worlds, offered no assistance. The world outside the window, a distorted reflection of its usual bustling self, seemed equally oblivious to my plight. Panic began to gnaw at the edges of my sanity. If I couldn't communicate, if I couldn't escape this warped reality, then what hope did I have? My mind raced, searching for a solution in the suffocating silence. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. A young boy, no older than 10, sat at a nearby table, oblivious to the distorted world around him. He was engrossed in a book, his finger tracing the lines of text with surprising speed. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered to life within me. If this boy wasn't experiencing the time dilation, then maybe, just maybe, he could be the key to my escape. But how could I get his attention? How could I communicate my desperate situation in this world, where even the simplest movement felt like an eternity? Chapter 9, A Glimpse of Hope. My gaze darted around the library, searching for anything that could be used to signal for help. My eyes landed on a stack of papers on the table next to me. With a Herculean effort, I stretched out my hand, the movement slow and agonizing, like wading through molasses. Each tremor felt like an earthquake in this distorted world. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, my fingertips brushed against the edge of a paper. Gathering every ounce of strength, I managed to pull it loose, the paper tearing with a deafening in my distorted perception. Rip. Now for the real challenge, getting the boy's attention. Throwing the paper was out of the question. Even the slightest toss would take an excruciatingly long time to complete, potentially alerting the librarian to the commotion. Instead, I focused on a silent plea, willing the boy to look up from his book. My eyes burned with unshed tears as I poured every ounce of desperation into my gaze. The seconds ticked by, each one an agonizing eternity. Then, a miracle. The boy seemed to sense something.
His head tilted slightly, his eyes flickering towards me.
For a heart-stopping moment, our eyes met. Did he see the terror in my gaze? Did he understand the silent plea for help? A flicker of recognition crossed his face. He blinked, a slow, deliberate blink that seemed to defy the distorted world around him. Then, to my utter astonishment, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a marker. Hope surged through me, a tidal wave threatening to break the dam of despair. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this nightmare after all. With trembling hands, the boy began to write on the palm of his hand, the large letters forming a single word. H-E-L-P. The word burned into my retinas, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. If the boy could understand, if he could act as a bridge to the normal world, then maybe, just maybe, I could escape this prison of distorted time. But a new wave of fear washed over me. How would he get help? Who would believe a child's story about a world moving in slow motion? The clock on the wall seemed to mock me with its agonizingly slow progress. Time was running out. The boy, his eyes fixed on mine, held up his hand, the single word, a silent promise. A promise of escape. A promise of a return to normalcy. All I could do was wait, hope clinging to me like a life raft in a churning sea as the terrifyingly slow seconds stretched into an eternity. Chapter 10, A Haunting Echo. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt like a constant reminder of my ordeal, even though I'd been discharged days ago. Restless energy coursed through me, a stark contrast to the forced stillness of the time distortion. The world outside, once vibrant and familiar, now felt muted, filtered through the lens of fear. Emily, my unwavering support system, sat beside me flipping through a magazine, her worried gaze occasionally flicking towards me. "Another bad dream?" she asked gently, sensing the tension radiating from me. I shook my head, the memory a constant echo in my mind. "No, not exactly. It's more like I struggled to find the right words. Like a shadow is following me. Everything feels slow." The experience in the library had irrevocably altered my perception of time. Each second, once taken for granted, now felt precious, a stark contrast to the agonizingly slow movements I'd endured. Even the bustling hospital hallway outside my room filled with hurried nurses and worried families, seemed to move in a jerky, disjointed manner. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Chen, entered the room. "How are you feeling today, Sarah?" she inquired, her voice gentle. "There's this lingering feeling," I admitted hesitantly. "It's not a relapse, is it?" The fear of being trapped in that distorted reality again sent a shiver down my spine. Dr. Chen smiled reassuringly. "No, Sarah. The tests show your brain is functioning normally. These lingering anxieties are completely understandable after such a traumatic experience." She explained that the human brain often processes trauma in unexpected ways, and these echoes were likely part of the healing process. While relieved there wasn't a physical cause for the distorted feeling, a wave of frustration washed over me. How long would these shadows linger? Would I ever feel truly normal again? The next few days were a blur of tests, consultations, and forced relaxation. Emily, ever patient, kept me company with board games, silly movies, and lighthearted conversation. But the disquietude remained, a constant reminder of the distorted world I'd glimpsed. One afternoon, while aimlessly flipping through a magazine, an article about a local art exhibit caught my eye. The artwork it described explored themes of perception and time. A spark of curiosity flickered within me. Perhaps seeing an artistic interpretation of my experience might offer some understanding, some catharsis. With a newfound sense of purpose, I convinced Emily to take me to the exhibit. The stark, modern gallery space was a far cry from the sterile hospital environment. As I walked amongst the paintings and sculptures, each piece seemed to resonate with my experience in a different way. One particular piece, a series of blurred photographs capturing the frenetic energy of a city street scene, brought a lump to my throat. The blurred figures, their movements captured in a distorted way, mirrored the fragmented perception I'd had in the library. Yet, there was a beauty in the chaos, a sense of life and movement that resonated with the normalcy I longed for. Standing before the piece, a wave of emotion washed over me. Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of relief and catharsis. This experience, terrifying as it was, had irrevocably changed me. But it didn't have to define me. Like the blurred figures in the photograph, I could choose to move forward, embracing the present moment, however distorted it may sometimes feel. Leaving the gallery, I stepped out into the bustling city street, the world now a cacophony of sights and sound. For the first time since the ordeal, the movement didn't feel slow, but vibrant, alive. Taking Emily's hand, I smiled. "Let's go for a walk." The distorted echo of the time distortion might never fully fade, but I knew, with newfound determination, that I could move forward, embracing the present and the precious seconds that made up my life. Chapter 11. Unforeseen Ability. The days following my discharge from the hospital blurred into a monotonous routine. The lingering echoes of the time distortion clung to me like a shroud, distorting my perception of the world. Every bustling street corner, every hurried passerby, felt like a cruel reminder of the normalcy I desperately craved. One afternoon, restlessness gnawed at me. Unable to bear the confines of my apartment any longer, I ventured out to the local library, the scene of my terrifying ordeal. Stepping through the familiar doorway, a wave of apprehension washed over me. Towering shelves, once a source of comfort, now seemed to loom menacingly. Driven by a desperate hope, I navigated the labyrinthine aisles, searching for the very spot where I'd reached out for help. As I rounded a corner, a familiar face sent a jolt through me. The young boy, no older than 10, stood perched on a stepladder, reaching for a book on the top shelf. Our eyes met. A flicker of recognition, a spark of understanding passed between us. This time, however, there was a hint of curiosity in his gaze, a silent inquiry. My heart hammered against my ribs. Could he be the key to my escape from this distorted reality? Desperate to connect, I locked eyes with him, focusing all my energy on conveying my message. Time seemed to stutter around me. The whirring of the air conditioner, the rustling of turning pages, all sounds faded into a distant hum. The boy's hand, reaching for the book, moved with agonizing slowness. Then, something unexpected happened. As I strained to focus, willing him to understand, the world around me lurched. The boy's hand, suspended in midair, stopped moving altogether. A gasp escaped my lips. Was it working? Had I somehow managed to manipulate this distorted reality with my mind? Tentatively, I released my focus. The boy's hand jerked forward, grabbing the book. He looked at me, a startled expression on his face. Time lurched back to its distorted pace, the hum of the library returning. Relief and exhilaration flooded me. I hadn't imagined it. Emboldened by this discovery, I decided to experiment further. Reaching for a book on a nearby shelf, I focused all my energy on it. The world stuttered again. This time, the book itself seemed to move in slow motion, its edges blurring as it drifted towards my outstretched hand. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I could manipulate objects within this distorted reality. The possibilities were staggering. Could I use this newfound ability to leave a message, a plea for help, for someone who perceived time normally? My gaze darted around the library, landing on a dusty payphone tucked away in a corner. With a surge of concentration, I slowed down time around the phone. The rotary dial, usually a blur in this distorted world, became distinct, its individual numbers clear and sharp. Focusing on the number pad, I painstakingly punched in Emily's number, each digit taking an excruciatingly long time to register. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I willed myself to maintain my concentration. Finally, with a triumphant click, the dial tone sounded clear and unwavering in the slowed-down world. Exhausted but exhilarated, I sank onto a nearby chair. Time lurched back to its distorted pace. The phone remained untouched, a silent testament to the message I'd hopefully sent into the normal world. Whether Emily would receive it, whether she'd understand, remained to be seen. But for the first time since my ordeal, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. I wasn't just a helpless victim trapped in a distorted reality. I possessed an unforeseen ability, a potential weapon against the slow-motion world. The road ahead might be uncertain, but with this newfound power, I was no longer alone. Chapter 12. Endgame. Anticipation gnawed at me like a persistent itch. Days bled into each other, a monotonous blur, punctuated by the agonizingly slow movements of the distorted world. The phone call I'd willed into existence, a beacon of hope in this warped reality, remained unanswered. Doubt gnawed at the edges of my newfound optimism. But I wouldn't give up. The ability to manipulate objects within the time distortion, however draining, offered a fighting chance. I practiced diligently, slowing down objects with increasing precision. Forays into the library became a desperate attempt to refine my control, to find a way to bridge the gap between my distorted reality and the normal world. One afternoon, my gaze fell on a bulletin board near the library entrance. A flurry of flyers, advertising upcoming events, seemed frozen in time, their vibrant colors muted in the distorted light. This was it. This could be my message. With a deep breath, I focused all my energy on a red marker lying on a nearby table. The world stuttered, the marker blurring as it drifted towards my outstretched hand. Grasping it tightly, I concentrated on the bulletin board, willing the distorted reality to bend further to my will. The surface seemed to ripple, the individual fibers of the corkboard coming into sharp focus. Painstakingly slow, I began to scrawl a message. trapped in slow motion. Help. Each letter was a Herculean effort, my hand trembling with exhaustion. But I persevered, etching my plea into the distorted reality. As I finished the last word, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The marker clattered to the floor, swallowed by the warped perception of time. I slumped against the wall, gasping for breath. Had I done enough? Would anyone see my message, understand its desperate cry for help? Days turned into weeks. Every visit to the library was an agonizing vigil, a desperate search for any sign that someone had noticed my plea. But the bulletin board remained untouched, the flyers frozen in time, my message a silent scream amidst the distorted reality. Despair threatened to consume me. Was I forever trapped in this slow-motion purgatory? Was the phone call a figment of my distorted perception? A tear rolled down my cheek, blurring my vision further. A choked sob escaped my lips, echoing in the deafening silence of the distorted world. Suddenly, a flicker of movement at the entrance of the library caught my eye. A young woman, her brow furrowed in concentration, stood gazing at the bulletin board. My heart lurched. Could it be? The woman reached out, her fingertip brushing against the very spot where I'd scrawled my message. Time seemed to stutter for a split second. Her eyes widened in shock, a gasp escaping her lips. Then, as quickly as it began, the distortion lurched back to its agonizing pace. Hope flared within me, a fragile flame battling the encroaching despair. Did she see it? Did she understand? The woman stood there for a moment longer, her gaze fixed on the bulletin board, then turned and hurried out of the library. I didn't know if it was a trick of the distorted light or a genuine anomaly, but the woman's reaction sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, my message had finally crossed the barrier, a ripple in the pond that might reach the outside world. The days that followed were an agonizing wait. Every creak of the library door, every hushed conversation sent a jolt through me. Was it someone coming to help? Or just another patron oblivious to the silent plea etched on the board? As another week crawled by, the weight of uncertainty threatened to crush me. But then, one afternoon, a familiar figure walked through the library doors. It was the boy, the one who'd understood my silent plea in the first place. Our eyes met. This time, a flicker of urgency shone his gaze. He hurried towards me, his movements surprisingly fast in this distorted world. Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out a marker, its colors vibrant and clear. With trembling hands, he began to write on a piece of paper, a silent conversation unfolding before my eyes. I saw, he wrote, the large letters clear and urgent. We'll get you out. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. Hope, once a flickering ember, now burned brightly within me. I wasn't alone. Help was on the way. The distorted world, with its agonizing slow motion, might not vanish overnight. But for the first time since my ordeal began, I could see a path towards escape, a glimmer of a life beyond the distorted reality.